Everyone, and welcome back to the Boogie Board Tiki Room. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Lee Rodgers, who's the co-founder and CEO of SIFT. Lee, thanks so much for joining us. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to
It's,
chat.
yeah, it's a pleasure. I always like to start with everyone's origin story because nobody plans to end up in the world of sales or sales technology. If I'm talking to 10 or 15-year-old Lee, what are you thinking about from a career perspective? I understand that you were an athlete, so I'm curious, maybe there were NFL dreams. What was going through your mind at an early age?
Yeah, I don't think I was intentional as I wish I would have been. But yeah, I was an athlete, so for me, growing up, football was pretty big. So I was big into that, and then I never really pictured the NFL necessarily, but I think it was kind of the natural progression of, you kind of dream of, playing college, and then the next step of that is the NFL. So yeah, not a ton as far as the vision. Definitely wasn't sales to your point. I do think a lot of people end up there unintentionally and then stay for multiple reasons. So, but yeah,
So you are you from Texas originally?
yeah, yep. I
Because you
grew up
went
in the
to
Houston area.
okay from Houston, and then you went to Texas A&M, and then you went to medical school. It looks like after that.
Yeah, yeah. So I went to Texas A&M, actually played football there for my first year, and then I moved into biomedical science and was thinking the doctor route was for me, and then I went to UT Houston Medical School for a year, and I loved the science and the school part of it, but wasn't sure I loved the business,
Hmm.
interaction side with insurance and a lot of different ways that that works. So, kind of wanted to take a pause and figure out what I wanted to do. So I took a leave of absence and then kind of fell into the tech world, and I loved that. So I decided to stay.
What's the story of falling into the tech world? How does it actually happen?
So when I grew up, my dad was in sales at a technology company, so I was kind of familiar with the
Hmm.
space. And my one of my co-founders at SIFT, Zach, who you guys have talked a few times, him and I became best friends in fourth grade. So, and his parents were in, or his dad was in the tech world as well.
Hmm.
Zach had gotten over to Oracle, and I was kind of talking to him about, hey, I'm not going to do the medical school thing, trying to figure out what I'd want to do. And he's like, hey, come interview at Oracle. We have this program. So I got into, one of they call it BDC, but lead gen roles and started learning, the sales world and moved from, BDC to inside sales, ultimately into field sales at Oracle, and then over to Workday, where I was before I started SIFT.
Yeah, I was looking at your career path, and it's similar to mine. I started as a BDR at a company called NetSuite, which you probably know.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, well, founded by Oracle, and so a lot of the similar bones in the program and things like that. And we were, it was intense when you start in a BDR program. You're smiling and dialing and putting off a bunch of prospecting emails. Any apprehension for you about that type of life, or did it catch right away and you were good at it and you were like, no, I see the path here?
I think so. I'm naturally an introvert, so things like this and things like cold calling and just having those interactions were always, I think, more effort for me.
Hmm.
So I think I did have a lot of apprehension, especially when you're early and I guess you haven't really experienced some of the, quote unquote business pain that you're going and trying to sell. So it's not, as natural and you don't have as much personal experience when you're talking about some of the issues you're talking with these leadership teams on. Um, but yes, from a cold calling perspective, there's definitely apprehension early. And then like anything, you kind of do it a lot and get used to it. And it's kind of business as usual, right? Get used
Yeah,
to a lot of no's.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And of course, you progressed pretty quickly. But if I look at your LinkedIn, inside sales, then field sales, and then over to Workday. Is there a point where selling, once you moved into the full sales cycle, like really clicked for you? A moment that you remember, maybe your first sale, where you're like, oh, okay, I feel like I can do this.
Yeah, I think so. I was in a unique spot at Oracle, which is kind of I look back and it's like kind of like thank God I was, because it fit my personality. I've always been fascinated in technology, but I actually sold our underlying tech or Oracle's underlying tech that powered a lot of they called them ISVs, but the software companies, right? So at the time Salesforce was big running Oracle, so that would be the kind of company that I would work with. So I think once I kind of got into that, and once you kind of get into the closing roles and you take more of a um, active part in the discovery process and figuring out, okay, where is there value between our organizations working together? And you start to get to know the people that, are building the technology for, your ultimate customer and like what are actually the real world scenarios that they're struggling with. And I think once I got into that aspect, it really started clicking for me. And honestly, it made sales for me a lot easier because you get to focus on the problem solving aspect. And for me, that's an exciting thing. First, before that, sales, and I think this is unfortunately a lot of the world and why sales gets a bad rep sometimes. They don't realize that that's the focus. They
Yeah,
kind of just have an amorphous idea of what sales might be.
absolutely. So then you're doing these sales roles, and you eventually start a company. You start Syft. So what is the genesis of the company? How do you come to found it?
Yeah, I think it was. Well, I guess there's multiple angles to that, so I'll answer it in two ways. One is like me personally, and then the other is kind of the genesis of the business problem that we wanted to set out to solve. Me personally, I kind of always wanted to start a company, and I've been very fascinated throughout my life with the technology aspect. Originally when I went to medical school, it was kind of like, how does the brain work? How do neurons work? Kind of the binary signals that the brain used to communicate, and then
Mm.
what are the parallels to, how, AI technology works, which I think there's different arguments on how similar those actually are. But at least when I was younger, like conceptually, they were very aligned. So I taught myself to code, was working on, some of the deep learning stuff before a lot of the cool frameworks are out, and obviously way before LLMs were out. So I started building technology on my own, and so I had kind of a, domain focus on the sales world, and I had a kind of a technology focus. Plus, I wanted to go ultimately start my own company. But it's like one of those things, you want to wait until there's a problem you're interested in solving, or you think
Yeah.
it's big enough to go solve. And obviously, in the sales world, we use a lot of the technology going through the roles, right? And like Zoom Info was a big one. And just what I found with all of those is they weren't really helping me with what I wanted to get to, which is like where are companies that I can actually add value? Like who do they actually have this problem that I can go help them solve that my product's very aligned to? And the best at the time we were getting is, I still think is true today, was, frankly, is just a big data provider and collector of emails and some signals or whatever they called them, scoops, they called them at the time. This was a while ago that I just found never got to the next level. And there's varying levels of actual, accuracy on those. And it was before a time like an LLM where contextual understanding is actually possible to be automated. So just very lacking. And like in theory, very much what you want to do in sales, right? It's like I have a product that was built to solve a problem. I need to go find the customers that have that problem. And we need to have a conversation, figure out how our organization's aligned. And there's a ton of those things that in theory should be able to happen because it's not necessarily like a hard thing to figure out. It's hard to go find them. And that's why people, leaned back on just blasting
Yeah.
emails and some of the, bad behavior that happened over time with some of the sequencing tools that got big. And so I obviously had some background in the sales side. And, Zach and I worked together. He moved up through the ranks too on the sales side, met Peter on the kind of technology side. We were talking about building some stuff together. And then, we realized that this is something that's, a big problem that's solvable, and people haven't really taken an angle on focusing completely on value between organizations as opposed to, data providing and some of the tooling that will help salespeople go do the research themselves. I'm like, let's just skip that step and get to what they really want, which is the alignment of value between, their product and prospects they can go find that have that problem. So I just wanted to jump into that. Why do the rest, right? The rest is just details that no one actually cares about or wants to do.
Yeah. Yeah. No one wants to do the giant data exercise to eventually land at the conclusion. They just want the conclusion.
Yeah. Well, they end up with the classic spreadsheet double sort, right? Sort descending by employees and then revenue, or vice versa, and dump them into Outreach or SalesLoft or whatever sequencing tool.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do territory design, so we ingest databases of millions of accounts often to help companies kind of figure out how they want to prioritize things. So I'm very familiar with those types of exercises. But I want to just quickly step back. So you taught yourself to code, and you're interested in the technical side of it. A lot of times, salespeople will get on a call and they'll say, "I'm not technical." Just a heads up to everyone. Kind of start apologizing for it. How did you think about learning to code? Were you scared of it at all, or did you just kind of dive in and figure it out?
I just kind of dove in and figured out. I think like I am, a naturally curious person, and I think one of the things that in my life that I need out of life is to continuously learn new things. Like I taught myself how to play piano, taught myself not fluent, but how to speak Korean. Obviously, coding was one of those things. And like there's so much online resources that are
Yeah,
free today, like the barriers of entry to learning things. And even now, especially with some of the AI products and LLMs that have come out, there's so much material to do. So I kind of just started like when I was at Oracle as a BDC, I would just wake up, like we would start, get in the office at 8 a.m., but I would just wake up at 5 and like start teaching myself to code and figure out a couple of projects that I wanted to start on. So I just, started learning and, beat my head against a lot of walls and made a lot of mistakes, but figured out, how to do things pretty well.
I love that. That's such an inspirational story because I think so many of us think things like that are out of the realm of possibility. Your story is a very practical one, albeit a hardworking one, but a very practical one in that regard. So you start the company, you have partners along for the ride with you. You've got an idea, a clear idea. What are those first few customer or maybe user interview type conversations like where you're probing people outside of just your natural vicinity, where you're testing the idea, figuring out what sticks and what doesn't? When do you know that you like have something there?
Yeah, I think this is like the classic founder dilemma, right? It's like if you ask people what this is what Henry Ford said, right? If you ask people what they want,
Yeah.
you'd end up with a faster horse, not a car, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, what's the aspect that you want to go focus on, what people are wanting today versus your vision for the future? I think a lot of people, it's kind of a mind shift. You kind of ask for some of the pain points you have now and the things you're doing now. It's like, well, can we like not even have to do those things at all? Like that problem you're talking about, it could not exist if we did this the right way. But I think I was kind of fortunate in, and was at or excuse me, I was at Workday for 3 years, and at the time, you know, there was just such a crazy concentration of like really, really good salespeople,
Hmm.
like best by far that I've seen. And it's, at the time, and maybe it still is, I don't know what the pricing is now, but it was one of the, it was a great product, but it was, 3 to 5x more expensive than anything else out there, right? So the focus had to be on value selling. Otherwise, like, people are just gonna go buy the next product. So I had a pretty good network of people I respected a lot on the sales side and what they're looking for out of the sales tool and what they thought about the idea, which is funny actually in some of those, a lot of those conversations early, at least with the leadership, guys who are managing things, they were all asking about territory planning. And it was also, the new year. So it's funny that you're going out to solve that problem. But a lot of things that you're doing, it sounds like they were asking for at the time. But everyone has a wealth of problems that you're trying to solve. So, you go through some of that. But that's kind of how I approached it and was careful to balance like, what is the market really like, what are the pain points right now in the market and how do they see those versus what's, SIFT's independent vision for the future and what can we do to change sales? What things can we eliminate completely and, put sales, focus and sales tech focus all around value as opposed to, the underlying, admin and data collection, the things you use to get to that value
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you not building a territory planning product during that time. So, when I'm on SIF's website, it is clear that you've decided to try to eliminate steps of that process. And you have this concept of value matching, which I think is really innovative. Can you take me through when you talk about kind of eliminating steps and then thinking about value matching, maybe what those two concepts actually are in practice today?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the sales process kind of end to end, and let's say we're starting from scratch, like, and maybe you're like, one of the first salespeople at a company, right? So the first thing you do is you come in, what products do I have that I'm going to be selling, right? What problems do those products solve? Let me understand that. Based on the, problems that my product solves, it's okay, I need to find customers that have this problem. So it's like, okay, well, how do I do that? Well, it's okay, like we have to look at what is data that I can go research, indicators that this problem might exist. And then from there, you go reach out, and then ultimately, if you're talking to people, it's you're aligning all those things together. And the reality is almost all of those steps we talked about, like none of them really matter. You want to basically eliminate all of those and go straight to what we call is the value match, right? So we essentially use AI to do all of those things today, for you. So we onboard a customer, we have AI that goes and looks at their products and then, gets a general understanding of what they do and, what problems they solve. We then have a different team of AI that kind of comes in and looks at, okay, based on these problems, what are all the things that we can go look for, indicators. And we have, a bunch of scraping we do to go find those. And then, we find the companies that have the problem, and then we look at those companies. We have another team of AI that goes and reads through every single one of those accounts, like, a sales rep would be doing if they had, 800 hours in a work week, which
Yeah.
obviously they don't. And that gets like when we find those, you have a really good company that has indicators of the problems that you can solve. You have, obviously the sales team, and it's easy to, put them together. It's a match, right? So that's kind of where we got with the value match concept. It's like, let's go straight for that. And, technology now with LLMs, especially, like a lot of the tools that were built in the past, like LLMs didn't exist, right? And sales is a very nuanced and contextual based process and, motion. And in the past, like relatively naive Python functions and scraping, like you just couldn't get to the alignment and to the understanding and be able to automate that, which is what we can do today, which is why there's things so powerful that we can just eliminate all of the other steps, right? Go straight to what you want with the context of, the product problem alignment in both companies.
And so I've got my value matches now, and I've seen some of your results on LinkedIn, which I think is pretty cool. Obviously, you folks are dog fooding your own product, but so I now know my value matches. Should I go hire an outbound AI SDR, right, which is all the rage and is going to spam cannon these, right? I'm saying that as kind of a general myth to tee you up for no SIFT thinks about it this
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, I think the AI SDR concept, that's always the question is how do we scale the efforts, right? Which, at first they did it with the email sequencing, automated tools, which kind of, scaled all the email stuff and led to like the kind of lazy spray and pray.
Hmm.
And now you have the AI SDR concept, which is just another way, to scale, what you're doing. And I think it's right. And I spend a ton of time with LLMs because I do, like a lot of the AI development for our company, as well as a lot of the UX stuff. But I just don't think today to have a really good, let's say you could do all the things. I don't think that like the LLMs are good enough yet to have the AI SDR concept. So I think that's a pretty tough thing to go after. But even then, as much as you like whatever you automate, if you don't have good messaging, if you don't have good value alignment with the prospect you're going after, like all you're really doing is scaling your, junk messaging really, really high,
Yeah.
which is, probably one of the worst things you want to do. So the first thing is you obviously have to have the value alignment or what we call the value match. And then how you use it, is a interesting question. So I'm not sure how the AI SDR concept will take off, and let's suspend disbelief and let's say that AI SDRs can have the quality of putting the data together and making the calls you also have the problem. One is psychological, the other is regulation, right? The psychology, if I'm a buyer, like I don't want to get called and spammed by a person, much and definitely not some random AI SDR that a company is like, trying to send out.
Yeah.
That's kind of the psychological thing you have to come around. Like I think people are okay with AI being used. I think most people are using it today with like ChatGPT, but people aren't okay with being tricked by AI into like trying to imply that it's a human
Yeah.
writing the email or a human making the call. I think that's one piece psychological challenge to get over. The other is a regulation piece. Like there's going to be a reality is, like at one point they made all the emails, you have to include an unsubscribe link, right? If you're doing bulk emails. Well, like you're gonna eventually have to in some way say this is an AI SDR. Like this is not a person
Yeah.
sending this email. This is not a person making this call. And so, even if you were trying to do kind of the psychological trick, this is a human talking to you or a human emailing you, you're not gonna be able to do that. And so it's how does that impact the market and people's willingness, to interact with an AI early? I think it's an open question. It's a really like let's say we suspend disbelief on all of that and you can do those things, like it's still a really hard challenge to build technology wise with LLMs where they are today.
Yeah.
I don't think any of them are gonna be good enough to do all of that. I think most SDR, AI SDR companies I've seen today is you actually spend a lot of time setting them up and doing a lot of, prompt engineering and figuring out like copying and pasting my sales message and like basically telling the AI SDRs what to do. So it's just interesting. Like, I'm interested to see how that goes. I haven't seen a big success story that I've talked to yet. I know there's a lot of companies trying and it's early, right? So I'm a TBD on that technology.
So what do you all do instead
So from
from an
an
outreach
engagement
perspective?
perspective,
Yeah, reaching
yeah,
out to prospective clients.
yeah. So this is an interesting question, right? So let's say you have the value match, like you still have the problem to solve of what do I do next? Like what's the
Yeah.
action I take? Um, so we take a less is more approach, a more human focused approach. Like instead of trying to scale, to millions of things that you're doing, let's focus on very small, very targeted outreach. And we have tools that, because we do have the true understanding of the value alignment between organizations. We have tools that, you can, once you have a value match, you can recommend the contacts and then you can one click a button and we'll go pull all of this together, go check your customer stories kind of stuff and pull all of that into an email for you.
Hmm.
But we bring up the email and we let you review it and you look at it. You don't have someone automated go, like, we want the human to be involved. And ultimately, I think most AI generated emails today, you can get 90% of the way there if you're really good, but you need to tweak some of it, which I personally like because it makes the AEs have to go read through it. Like I think sales tools, I actually put a post on this. Like I think sales tools like need to be opinionated and they need to, tell you who not to talk to, right? So the level of tasks I think should actually be brought down from a, AE or BDR perspective. And like, don't worry about those, 200 accounts in your territory that like just don't have a problem that you really can solve well for them. Like maybe they're kind of aligned. Maybe they would be good to put in like a marketing campaign to know who you are. And like we'll keep reading through it and keep them, up to date on what those companies are doing. But don't reach out to them because
Yeah.
you're just hurting your brand and you're wasting your time. So let's get really good at telling you the companies to reach out to. Let's keep that, amount manageable, and then let's help give you the tools to be very efficient on getting to the message that you want, to the
Tool,
right accounts.
tools for focus, tools for iteration. I think that makes a lot of sense. And your email concept brings to mind the word generative, right? In your other example of an AI SDR, like the person is spending their whole time prompting. So is that generative, or are you doing the dev work for the company that you're, working with? Whereas in your example, there's a generative approach, and then the human is taking it forward. So I really kind of appreciate that line of thinking. We kind of think about territory similarly.
Yeah.
I want to move on to a couple other questions. So I imagine you're talking to a ton of sales organizations, go to market organizations right now. I'm curious what you hear that just makes you put your head in your hands. You seem like a positive guy, so maybe I can just ask you to be negative for a moment.
I think, the biggest thing like I've seen is, and this isn't always the case, but it's very head in the hands moment, like where they don't seem to value, which is funny, value messaging, right? Like they're doing quote unquote good enough with
Mm,
blasting out calls and blasting out emails. Because they're getting enough, maybe it's because they haven't hit the scale that they're exhausting people that will like say yes. But I think that's kind of a head in the hands moment when, for whatever reason, that interaction, it doesn't feel like they even care about solving the problem and having the
interesting.
value alignment because like it's good enough right now. And then sometimes, good enough is good enough, I guess. It's just, it's kind of like for me, and this is kind of a fundamental just position I have, like everything in sales should be about value, right? And even if your, meetings are good enough, could you be having way better meetings and, going into those meetings with a good value alignment, which obviously has implications on your sales cycle, your, shortening the time to value because you know what problem to solve. You bring in a perspective. You don't have to go ask them your list of 20 discovery questions and you can come in and say, hey, like I saw these things probably means you have these problems. Here's how we can help. Do we miss anything? What do you think? Which I think builds a ton of credibility, and I think buyers really like that, especially in a world where it has not been the case for quite a while.
Yeah, you're making me wonder if those people were measured on. I feel like they were all measured on activities at some point, right? Like I was. That was the game. Is
Yeah.
kind of how many you could get out, and if they're still trying to do that, it
Yeah.
misses the
No, no, I
message.
think I think that's the case, and I think actually, like, probably maybe you answered my question there. It's I just yeah, if people, I think especially the Legion organizations, they're incentivized the wrong way right now. Like most of them are incentivized by activity, and you need the activity regardless of how good your message is, right? And so maybe like 90% of your, compensation is activity, and I maybe 10% is tied to, okay, of like what pipeline is actually generated from that
Yeah,
activity. And 10% might even be high. Some companies aren't even like their lead gen teams aren't even measured on revenue generated, which obviously ties back to quality outreach. So I think that's a fundamental issue. Like when I when I was at Oracle and as a lead gen person, like it was so bad. We were measured so hard on metrics. Like it was the end of the quarter. Like you like and obviously this is like a moral thing I don't agree with, but some people would like legit call into like Coke, and they didn't sell to Coke. They would just call into their little like recording machine and customer support that like would, you know, route them anywhere, and they would just do that. So all the systems measuring their talk time would like measure that they're talking on the phone, and so they'd hit their activity metrics. Like when you have people doing that, like there's a clear misalignment on what they're being measured on versus what their goal is.
I can remember a lot of stories like that about setting meetings with completely innocuous people so that you could show a calendar invite was accepted. All right, now so
Ooh, calendar invite accepted. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
Sorry.
that was the status. You trigger a meeting scheduled. It was a big deal. All right, so my last question: you have now been in sales for a while. If I call what you're doing now just in sales generally, you've become very technical throughout that process. Would you say that sales since you started is more or less the same fundamentally, or is it more different than when you started? Are things fundamentally the same, or are they fundamentally different?
That's hard to answer in a way. Like I think this is the most non-answer of all time, but I think that there's some things that are quite different, and then there's some fundamentals that I think will never be different. The things that are never will never be different is all around value, which is why like I want SIFT to really own that space and be really, really good at value alignment between, a buyer and a seller. And like that, because fundamentally that is sales, right? Like problem and solution connection. So I don't think that the need for that has changed at all. I think the tools that companies have at their fingertips now, like Syft, allow you to be better at doing that. And I think, things that are different, I think a lot of companies, you had to push to, cloud SaaS type, software instead of like on-prem, so like the pricing models changed, the need for like, for example, like Oracle used to, they sold database, right? And like a lot of those were on-prem, so you'd have larger upfront deals that you sell once, and then they had, which is crazy, like a X recurring, support subscription you'd have to do to try to get some subscription revenue. But there was, some poor behavior on the sales side, and people had a lot of bad taste in their mouth. But it was okay because like they're locked into a 3-year on-prem database contract. They've already spent the money, right?
Yeah.
Versus in a cloud world where it's either consumption based or it's recurring. And a lot of these companies, like the cost to switch services is just going down and down. So the need to not just sell your product once, but keep organizations using that product and showing the value. So I think that's a different mentality. And I think it's, that's a good thing, honestly. It's a different mentality you have to take because it's not a one and done thing. Like, I think a lot of, unfortunately, salespeople in the past like had the leeway to burn bridges and just get deals done.
Mm.
That's very much not the case today. I think it's a good thing.
Absolutely. I'm with you. Lee, well, I really appreciate you talking to me today. I've loved learning about Syft. I've seen the product and can verify that it's awesome. And I'll be excited to see you at some point when you move back to Austin here.
Cool, cool. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.